In today's story, we follow a girl born with nothing, who found kindness and family in the alleyways of a broken city. But the world is never fair. It always finds a way to take from those who have nothing left to give. Her gift with a brush may be the one thing that can save her from the streets, but only at the cost of everything she holds dear. Welcome to Krane Originals, home of original fantasy tales set in Sha'Rune, a world of mystery, heartbreak, and triumph, touched by just the right amount of magic. If you crave new original stories every week and enjoy what you see, then don't forget to hit the like and subscribe, and come, join the adventure. Now, let the tale begin. This is the story of a street rat of Shacor. In the year 685 of the Second Era, Shacor was a nation known for many things, from its harsh lands to its even harsher economic state. Yet, despite these things, the country was also known as the center of the cultural revolution. Its cities were often filled with great painters and musicians and playwrights whose works went unknown, for they were a dime a dozen in the lands of Shacor. Yet this would not be the case for the young girl who went by the name Samantha, whose gift with a brush would change and quite literally save her life. Now the story takes place in Rosabut, the capital of Shacor, a city where many came from far and wide to see the wonders of the land and marvel at the different sounds and sights to be seen and heard. Well, some came to make a name for themselves. It wasn't the case for Samantha. She was Shacor born, and her wild red hair and nearly pale blue eyes were a clear giveaway to anyone who saw her. An average girl, her story was like that of many others. An orphan by plague, forced to live on the streets and given no more respect than a common rat. She was nothing more than a street rat of Shacor. Yet despite being orphaned, Samantha was not without family. Not by blood, but by fellow wandering souls she found on the streets of Shacor. Her fellow pack of rats, which included young friends and hustlers, as well as old-timers who showed them the ropes and helped keep them warm during the harsh winter storms and gave them water during Shacor's unforgiving dry summer days. They were never rich, and they were always battling for the next meal. Samantha and her family's greatest strength was each other, for they knew that if they stood together, they could do anything. So bold were the kids that some of her friends would even steal and smuggle brushes and paint to keep her talents alive, for they knew she wasn't like them. She was special. She was a true artist of Shacor, and to be honest, it gave them something more than just survival to look forward to. And in return, she would paint them masterpieces, far better than any that could be found littering the streets of Shacor. However, times began to change for her family's street rats. The once old-timers of the group who showed the kids how to survive, to steal, to feed themselves. Now most of them were gone, and the lucky ones, if you could call them that, had started to become old and frail, too slow to outrun the law anymore. And the once leaders of the pack of rats were now becoming a burden. It was now the young ones' turn to repay the favor, to steal and provide for the family. For together, they were strong. They thought themselves invincible, as the young usually do. But it wouldn't be long till the pack of rats would find themselves tested in ways they could never imagine. In just a few months, the group was cut in half. For you see, in Shacor, a thief was a thief. No mercy was shown simply for being young. And without the adults to protect them and guide them, the children grew sloppy and overly daring in their ventures. Their greedy eyes and empty stomachs led them to make foolish mistakes, and poor Samantha could do nothing but watch helplessly as her family slowly disappeared in front of her eyes, whether they were captured, injured, or killed. This continued until only a handful of them remained. Samantha, who had usually been favored and really had to steal for herself, now found herself on the front lines as one of the few still able to provide. At first, she was smart, only stealing what she thought would go unnoticed. Nearly spoiled food, torn rags. Sometimes, she would even be bold enough to steal from rich men at brothels where they were too busy to notice. She figured to herself that they would just blame one of the girls. But without any proof, no one would get hurt. It would be a harmless crime, or so she thought. But she would never know the truth, never know how many women she cost, from the jobs to sometimes their very lives. But this was Shacor, and if they weren't your family, they weren't your problem. She never stole more than she needed though, and never pawned anything for gold like some had done before her. She was smart, always trying to keep her face hidden, always trying to stay one step ahead of the rest, never stealing from the same location twice. And for a while this worked. For a while, this kept her family safe and fed. But the world was never kind and never easy for the pack of rats. And despite Samantha's prayers, it would always seem that something was just waiting just around the corner to remind her that life was not meant to be easy. Not for people like her. So almost like clockwork, an unknown illness would sweep through Shacor, and her family, which had already been reduced to just a few able children, now would be reduced to only two. Samantha and her brother Theo were the only two left standing. The rest were either gone or left blinded and unable to provide because of the plague. Now, Theo was a good kid, and like Samantha, careful. But with only him and Samantha as the only two able to provide for their family, the boy knew that things had to change, that he would have to step up and be bolder, that he would have to find ways to steal more and faster. He had to be daring and smart at the same time. He knew it was time for a boy to become a man. He knew his sister was a painter, not a thief, not a real one like him. So despite Samantha's protests, Theo began to take bigger risks, stealing more food, even coins and jewelry. He was good at it. Maybe too good. It wouldn't take long before his talent would go unnoticed. And before he knew it, he had drawn the attention of a proper band of thieves. At first, Theo was hesitant to join them. But in the end, after they showed him how much he could really make, he had no choice. He had a family to provide for after all. Now for a while, all was well. Theo began to bring in serious coin. So much so that he would even be able to give some to Samantha. And for the first time, the girl was able to know what it felt like to buy something and not steal it. It felt good, but wrong and foreign to the girl who had known nothing else but to take without giving. Samantha would ask Theo how he was able to get a hold of so much so quickly. But the boy would just smile and tell her not to worry, that her big brother Theo is just that good. He would even finally buy her a proper set of brushes and paint. And for the first time, Samantha would paint with the same tools as the greats. However, as the saying goes, if it seems too good to be true, it often is. Eventually, Samantha would catch wind of Theo's activities, and she would beg him to stop, warning him about the dangers of associating with men like that. But for the first time in his life, Theo was fed and his family secure. He and his family of rats had a place to stay each night. Even if it was broken down inns and shady brothels, it was better than the streets that he was used to. So unwilling to heed Samantha's warning, he felt compelled to continue what he was doing. But one day, Samantha's worst nightmare would come true. One day, Theo would not return home. He would never be seen again. No warning, no nothing. Just gone, like so many before him. He had become her final shoulder to cry on, even though she often disagreed with his choices. She loved him, and had grown accustomed to him taking care of her and their family, which had now dwindled down to only the weak, sick, and elderly. The truly young did not make it. Exhausted and broken, Samantha at first refused to give up on Theo. She banged on every door and ventured into dark alleyways, demanding to know where he had gone and what had happened to him. But weeks passed, and after enduring a couple of black eyes and a good beating or two, her spirit finally broke. So with a broken heart, the girl came to accept that she would never see Theo again. That like so many of her brothers before, the streets of Shacor had taken him away. After spending what little coin she had left from Theo, the girl knew it was up to her to solely provide. She was alone, like she's never been before. There were no brothers to protect her now, and the adults who once were like her parents, who once took care of her when she was little, now needed her to be brave, to take care of them, like they once did for her. So with no other choice, and no more coin to spend, Samantha went back to the streets, a thief like before, but this time alone, with no one to have her back. Now, while she lacked in talent like her brothers before her, she had one trick that they did not. She was a girl with an innocent face, and thanks to Theo, she had been able to clean herself up a bit in the last few months. She even wore a shawl that Theo had bought her the day before he disappeared. So, now looking not too ragged, she was able to enter some of the lower class shops and bakeries, pretending to be a customer, even being so bold as to strike up a conversation or two with the shop owners, before stealing what she could without being noticed. And yet, despite this working, despite her doing all she could, Samantha would still wake up every morning, knots in her stomach, knowing it was not enough. Her family was starving, and despite barely eating herself, only taking what little she could for herself to keep up her strength, it just wasn't enough. Something had to change. And so, as luck would have it, a festival would be coming to Shacor, one so grand that perhaps she could steal enough to get them through the month. So with the harvest festival fast approaching, Samantha could not help but feel hopeful. With the packed streets and swarm of people moving in and out of every shop and food stand, and tourists outnumbering locals, she thought it would be easy pickings to gather extra for her and her family. The festival was set to last for 2 weeks, giving her a much-needed break. Initially, her plan worked. She swiftly managed to snatch food and coins from unsuspecting patrons. However, one day she stole from the wrong man, someone far more feared than any merchant or crime lord. Success had made Samantha a bit cocky. One day, she saw a massive table overflowing with fruits, meats, and bread. The sight made her heart race and her mouth water. Unable to resist, she quickly snatched a loaf of bread and some grapes. But then, like a knife to the heart, she heard the screams of a guard. She had been caught in the act. At first, she froze, hoping that he wasn't yelling at her, but at another thief. But luck was not on her side. A large hand grabbed her shoulder. Without hesitation, Samantha ripped free, tearing her shawl as she ran into the crowd, ignoring the guard who demanded that she stop. But he wasn't just any city guard. Something was different. His uniform was odd. She noticed more men being called over by him as he pointed directly at her. She didn't want to look back, but she couldn't resist glancing over her shoulder. What began as one man became 3, and then 3 became 6, as the swarm of men chased her through the crowds of people, pushing anyone in their way aside. She could not understand why so many guards would care so quickly. Even for Shacor, this was extreme. No matter how she turned or how hard she tried, Samantha could not lose them. Her heart raced and tears ran down her face as she found herself lost in the very city she had known so well. In a panic, she began to pull at her hair, and was praying to any god or entity that would offer her aid. Yet no mercy was granted as the men closed in on her. Once again, she sprinted at full speed, knocking over a few stands and attracting the attention of merchants she had stolen from in the past. Merchants who would now surely recognize her. Her knife was unraveling before her eyes, and she felt utterly powerless to stop it. At first, Samantha ran away, but then she began to run home. The thought of leading these men to her family never even crossed her mind. In that moment, she was not a thief or a criminal, just a child trying to get home safely. Unfortunately, it was only when it was too late that she realized the mistake she had made in leading the men to her family. As she tore through the ripped curtains and past the broken door of their abandoned home, Samantha, in tears, screamed for help, crying for mercy as the men closed in around her. The group of elders stood up, shouting in weak and timid voices for the men to leave the girl alone, insisting she had done nothing wrong. The new children instinctively scattered, running and crawling away to safety. But the old men and women were no match for the men, who silenced them with force, kicking and hating them to the ground like they were nothing more than old, broken animals. It did not take long for their leader to arrive, a chancellor of the church named Lorenzo Amato. He was a thin, short man who entered the room with an air of authority that defied his small stature. Dressed in fine silks of red and gold, the colors of the church, he moved with a graceful sway as if he was dancing his way to Samantha. She screamed in protest, begging him to leave her alone. But Lorenzo remained calm and terrifying. His hands were the softest she had ever felt as he caressed her face, telling her to hush now and assuring her she had nothing to fear. For reasons she couldn't understand, she believed him. Initially terrified of his grandeur, she found herself calming down as she looked into his eyes, noting a tenderness that perhaps hinted at kindness as he surveyed her broken home. "Why did they chase you here?" he asked, his voice soft and inviting. Still frazzled, she didn't initially understand the question. "Was it you?" he pressed, finally turning his gaze back at her. Despite the kindness in his voice, her fear resurfaced. All she could do was nod in response. "I see," was all he said in return. "You know the price for theft. You may be young, but not young enough to be called innocent by arrogance." And with a flick of the wrist, the guards slammed Samantha back down. She screamed and cried for mercy, but Lorenzo did not flinch. Instead, he simply walked around the broken home of street rats, examining the faces of the poor and broken with disgust. Two men held the girl down, and despite her best efforts, they stretched her arm across the broken table. She begged and begged, and the elderly once again stood up in protest. But quickly, they were pushed back down as the men unsheathed their swords, warning that the next person to come forward would be struck down. Samantha now screamed at the top of her lungs as she watched in horror as one of the men lifted his sword. Her entire body began to shake, and her arm that she knew he was aiming for began to tighten with anticipation. But just as the man was about to cut off her arm, the chancellor's voice for the first time sounded harsh, and he yelled at the men, "Stop!" Moments passed as the chancellor examined each of Samantha's paintings, stroking his chin in admiration. You see, Lorenzo was newly appointed to his position. The Church of the Nine Gods was widely respected across the continent of Rulia, and Shacor was no exception. He had organized the festival in hopes of acquiring some art to decorate his lavish estate. Yet the prices of renowned pieces were beyond his current capabilities. Although the streets were filled with stunning masterpieces, he sought something that truly stood out. Before him was a collection of art hidden within a broken home, filled with nothing but street children. Yet it housed some of the greatest works he had ever seen. "Did you draw these?" the Chancellor asked, his face devoid of any empathy as he looked down at the girl. All Samantha could do was weakly nod. "Could you draw more?" he asked. Though she hadn't drawn in months, she now nodded furiously, trying to assure him that she could. "Take her with us," he ordered, turning to his men to collect her paintings. Samantha was overwhelmed. Everything was happening so quickly, and she was just left speechless. Could this really be true? Moments ago, she was about to lose her right arm, and now she is being told to be packed up like a sack of groceries. However, her relief was short-lived. As she glanced back at the frightened men and women, the elderly who remained cowering in the corner. Her family. "Wait!" Samantha shouted. "I can't just leave them. They're my—" Suddenly, a loud clap echoed through the broken walls as Lorenzo struck her. She quickly grabbed her face, her entire body trembling once again. "I would not have street rats in my domain, little girl. You will be my personal grand artist. These people have no value or right to be in such places." Samantha was about to protest when an elderly man named Marcel, blind and unable to speak, grabbed her arm with surprising strength. Though he could not express himself verbally, his shaking head and determined grip communicated clearly that she should go, for her own sake and the chance at a life none of them could have ever dreamed of. Burning tears streamed down Samantha's face as she resisted the idea of leaving her family behind. She knew what would happen to them without her, but as she looked around, the only things she could see was her family, the only one she ever knew. She watched as the young ones, with open hands, begged for her to stay. But the elderly ones who had taken care of her when they could, the ones she now had taken care of, every one of them waved for her to go, begged for her to leave with the Chancellor. One old woman even muttered, "Go, you fool! Get out of here!" As if in a dream, she felt Lorenzo's hands on her shoulder as he guided her away. She initially reached out for Marcel, but as they moved further away, she could no longer bear the sight. Tears filled her eyes as she turned away, knowing it would be the last time she would see her family. "I'm sorry, I love you," was all she could say as she was swept away to her new life. Her hands trembled as she held onto her torn shawl. Her last thought before her broken house disappeared from sight was of Theo, wondering if he would be happy for her or disappointed. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed that original story. If you liked what you saw, please hit that like and subscribe. We post here every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, a new original story, all taking place within the same world. So, if you want to explore more of this world, click here for the next story. Or over here, whenever I put up some more.